I am an Perfect. I am an AmeriCorps environmental educator at Eno River Association. Been there for about a year and a half now, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about Eno Amphibians. Amphibians are, a group of animals that are near and dear to my heart. I took a herpetology class in undergrad several years ago at University of Georgia and really fell in love with reptiles and amphibians. So we kind of did this in honor of both Creek Week, which ended last weekend, and World Frog Day, which was March 20th. We just wanted to kind of take some time to talk about our amphibious friends that live along the Eno. So with all that being said, I am going to go ahead and get into it. Try to get this thing to go away. I don't know. Okay, so I think a good place to start is to talk about what an amphibian is. So the word amphibian comes from the Greek word amphibious. So amphi means both and bios means life. So this term refers to the two lives that many amphibians live. So an amphibian can be defined as an ectothermic vertebrate animal, distinguished by having an aquatic gill-breathing larval stage, followed typically by a terrestrial lung or skin-breathing adult stage. And typically the young go through metamorphosis to turn into that adult. Now, this is not always the case. So as we will see later with a few examples of salamander species, but for the vast majority of amphibians, this is true, that they have this kind of like two phases of life where they're aquatic gill-breathing larvae and then come on land as adults. Another way to think about amphibians is that they're sort of like intermediate between fish and reptiles. So evolutionarily, they kind of came between those two groups of animals and share some characteristics of fish and some of reptiles. And another thing that people often think about with amphibians is the fact that they have permeable skin. So they tend to have this thin, moist skin that is permeable to water and other liquids that can pass through it easily. They tend to need their skin to stay pretty moist, especially since many of them breathe using their skin to some extent, like usually during their adult stage. But the permeable skin also means that they do tend to be very susceptible to toxins and to pollution and all sorts of things that can get into their skin and into their bloodstream from contact with those things in the water. So that's just something to be aware of, and it kind of makes amphibians a little more vulnerable than some other species. The number of known amphibian species is approximately 8,000, of which nearly 90% are frogs. So the vast majority of amphibian species are frogs. Okay. Just a little bit about amphibian evolution. Fossil evidence shows that amphibians evolved around 365 million years ago in the Devonian period of the Paleozoic era, and they evolved from a lobe-finned lungfish ancestor. As the earliest land vertebrates, they were highly successful. Some of them were much larger than today's amphibians, as we'll see here in just a moment. I'll give an example. But for more than 100 million years, amphibians really remained the dominant land vertebrates and were very, very successful. They had kind of, both spent part of their time in the water and part of their time on land, and were really successful in that way. Modern amphibians first appeared during the early Triassic around 250 million years ago. And today there are 3 modern orders of amphibians that are what we call extant, or still, there are still species existing today. So they're not extinct, they're not fossil species. So these 3 orders are Anura, which are the frogs, Urodela, which are the salamanders, and Apoda, which are the caecilians. So I've got to mention caecilians really quick because not a lot of people know about them. But this is a group of amphibians. They are not found in North America. They only live in the tropics of South and Central America, Africa, and Southern Asia. But this is a group of limbless kind of worm or snake-like amphibians that mostly, they kind of stay hidden in soil and stream beds. They're very elusive. You don't see them a whole lot. So definitely some of the lesser known amphibians when compared with frogs and salamanders. A couple of world records. I just thought this would be fun to mention. So the largest known amphibian to have ever existed was Mastodonsaurus. So this species is from a an extinct genus of primitive amphibians from the Middle Triassic in Europe. And they may have exceeded about 20 feet in length. So very large amphibians. They fed mostly on fish, but there is actually some evidence of adults being cannibalistic and feeding on juveniles of the species. And then they also likely ate some terrestrial animals as well. And one cool thing is that they had these like tusks on their bottom half of their jaw that would actually protrude through the holes in the top half of their skull when their jaw was closed. Okay, so the smallest living amphibian today that is still around today, it doesn't have a common name that I'm aware of, but its Latin name is Paedophrin amoensis. And this is a frog from Papua New Guinea, and it reaches only about 7.7 milliliters or 0.3 inches. So really, really, really tiny frog. Pretty cute. And then the largest living amphibian is the Chinese giant salamander. So these are still alive today, although they are critically endangered. They're found in southern China. They can reach almost 6 feet in length. And they're actually in the same family as the hellbender, if you're familiar with that species that is found in North Carolina, not in our area, but in Western North Carolina. Okay, any questions or thoughts or anything so far? Hopefully I'm not moving too fast. There's just a lot to cover. But if not,
Dana, it looks like you might be trying to say something. There we are.
There we go. Yay. Do we have mad toms in this area?
Mad toms, like the fish?
Yeah, well, aren't they mad toms are amphibians? They're the ones that have the frilly gills and stuff, right?
I think you might be thinking of water dogs. So the
water dogs,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Carolina mad tom is a fish species that is found in North Carolina. It hasn't been found in the Eno in a long time. It was recently listed as endangered, but along with it, the Neuse River water dog was listed as threatened, and we will be talking about the Neuse River water dog. They do exist in the area. Yeah, so they are, a handful of them have been found in the Eno in the past several years, but their populations are definitely declining. So, but I will talk about that species a little bit later on. So,
and I didn't hear anything about amphiumas.
Amphiumas.
Yeah, are y'all talking about that some too? I know there's some at Robertson Mill Pond, but I
don't have amphiumas on in my presentation today, just because I haven't, like, I was going to kind of give a precursor that the species that I'm going to talk about are ones that are encountered often throughout the Eno. So amphiumas, to my knowledge, aren't encountered often. But if I'm
cricket frogs, that was it. I wanted to ask you about cricket frogs. They like the more still water, right? Because I hear them along the quarry area along the Eno.
Yeah, well, actually, cricket frogs can really pretty much be found throughout. So they definitely do like still areas. A lot of frog species rely on those like ephemeral pools that fill up and then dry out, which we'll talk about. But they can really be found throughout, and sometimes more rapid moving areas. So it just kind of depends, but they're pretty common throughout the Eno.
I just love hearing them in June along the still waters. But okay, so they like the other water too. Cool.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I'll talk about cricket frogs as well. Thank you for all of those questions. So I'll go ahead and jump into frogs. So we're just going to start with a general overview of what a frog is. So frogs are in the order Anura. They are a group of mostly carnivorous, short-bodied, tailless amphibians. The adults tend to have protruding eyes. They have anteriorly attached tongues, so they're attached to actually the front of their mouth, like which obviously differs from us. And then their limbs tend to be folded underneath them. They are widely distributed, ranging from the tropics to the subarctic regions, with the greatest diversity in tropical rainforests. And like I mentioned before, the vast majority of amphibian species are frogs. I do want to mention frog reproduction really quick. So the vast majority of frogs practice external fertilization. So basically the male frog attaches to the female frog. Sometimes this is called amplexus, and fertilizes the eggs as the female frog releases them. There are a few very rare examples of frog species that practice internal fertilization, but that's like I said, most of them definitely practice external fertilization. Eggs generally hatch between 1 and 3 weeks, but that's really dependent on the species, and it also depends on environmental factors like water temperature. So warmer water tends to lead to faster development. And then tadpoles generally transform into young froglets between 3, 4, 5 months. But once again, that can really vary depending on the species. So for example, American bullfrogs can remain a tadpole for up to 3 years. So just depends on the species, but in general, you can kind of, with the smaller frog species, guess that they're going to metamorphose in several months. In terms of diet, most adult frogs primarily feed on insects, but tadpoles are often omnivorous, so they'll feed on small macroinvertebrates and insects, as well as plant matter and algae. And then I do just want to mention a few body parts that I will use, you'll hear me mention when I'm talking about identifying species. So the first is the tympanum. This is basically an eardrum. It's a membrane that transmits sound waves to the inner parts of the amphibian's ear. So you can see it, or of the frog's ear, you can see it kind of back here behind the eye. So that's the tympanum. You'll also hear me mention dorsolateral folds or ridges, and this is just like two kind of skin, it's raised skin that runs down the side of some frogs' backs, and I'm not sure if there's really a purpose for them. I couldn't find anything on that, but they can definitely be used in identification, as we'll see in just a few moments. And then in terms of vocalizations, so I'm sure a lot of you know that the male frogs vocalize, right? So it's only the male frogs that call, and they do that to attract mates or to defend territory from rival males. Female frogs can make small chirping noises and things like that in certain situations, but they don't do those full-on calls. So male frogs, they do this by taking air into the lungs. So they inhale, then they close their mouth and their nostrils, and they push the air back and forth between their lungs and their mouth. And as the air travels back and forth, it passes over the vocal cords and it makes them vibrate and it produces sound. And then that vocal sac that you see in this green tree frog really helps to amplify that sound and make it even louder. So one of the things with frogs is, most species, it's kind of a benefit that they have this calling mechanism, because they don't have to actively fight each other to get mates, right? Instead, they just have to call louder than the male next to them. So it's kind of a benefit in that they don't have to exert themselves in combat with other male frogs, but instead they just try to call as loud as they can. And then the parotoid gland, you can see here on this in this picture up in the right-hand corner. This is another thing that I'll mention. It's an external skin gland that can secrete toxins. So all toads have these, and some other frog species as well. Okay, so we're going to start with some of the common frog species along the Eno, but I just want to mention that all the frog species that I'm going to be talking about can be really found throughout the Eno. Typically, they can be found along the edges of the river in vegetation or grassy areas. Some can be found more into the wooded areas and moist wooded areas. Some are more likely to be around ephemeral pools, those pools that kind of fill up and then dry out. So some are kind of like we were talking about, some are kind of located around more still water. But as we know with the Eno, there are lots of areas around the Eno, since it's in the low elevation area. There are lots of areas that collect water around the Eno, like in pools and ponds and whatnot. and little wetland areas. And so frogs can really benefit from those areas and use them to their advantage. Also just want to mention that size of a frog is a good, like if you're brand new to identifying frogs, size is just a good first step, because some of the species we're going to talk about don't get nearly as big as others. So, you know, you can use that as a first kind of rule of thumb when you're trying to ID a frog species, because if it's 5 inches, that's going to rule out 5 inches long, that's going to rule out a lot of species that we talk about. So you'll see this little images that say the average adult size on each of the slides. So just you can pay attention to that when it comes to identification. So we're going to be talking first about family Ranidae. This is the true frog family. There are about 700 species worldwide in this family. It is the widest distribution of any of the frog families. And the first species that we're going to talk about is the southern leopard frog. So this species is, I see it really regularly along the Eno. They tend to have these scattered, well-defined dark brown spots on their body that aren't really arranged in any specific pattern. And then they have these yellowish dorsolateral ridges on each side of their body. They also tend to have a white spot in the center of their tympanum, which you can see right here. And that's important to know when comparing it to the next species we're going to talk about.
RJ, this is Ed Harrison.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched one make a really long leap? It's one of those memorable things from when I was seasonal naturalist way back when. There was a very well-placed boulder on the trail and a well-placed boulder on the river, something like 10, 12 feet. And I came upon the frog and decided, I think I'd better stand there and just watch it. And I think it didn't acknowledge I was there, but while I was there, it made the leap, and the precision was just incredible.
Yeah.
I think it just sat there and focused until it had everything exactly right. And with that little brain, to be able to do that so well, this is a remarkable. I mean, all the memorable things you can see in a summer on the that about beat all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this species is really, you see on this slide, it says they're really powerful leapers. This one and the pickerel frog as well, but especially the southern leopard frog, in my experience at least, is they have those really long hind legs that are just really powerful and muscular, and they can just launch themselves. And like you said, yeah, with great precision, which is pretty special. Pretty cool stuff. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I feel like I come across them a lot just on the sides of the Eno, and sometimes you don't even know they're there, and then you just see something flying out of the corner of your eye, and they're launching into the river. It's really cool. Okay, so the last thing about identification is that this species does tend to have a very pointed snout when compared with the next species we're going to talk about, the pickerel frog. They tend to rely on these fishless temporary ponds that I keep mentioning, these ephemeral pools. So basically what I mean by that is these are areas that, that fill up at certain times of the year during rainy seasons, and then they dry back out. So because of that, obviously fish can't live in them because fish need water all the time, right? So fish can't live in those areas that fill up and then dry out. Which means that they don't have fish to worry about as predators. So a lot of frog and salamander species will rely on those temporary pools to lay their eggs so that they can ensure that they don't have those fish predators and that the young will be more likely to survive. Okay, we are going to listen to the calls of each of these species, these frog species, to talk about how to identify that. And Hillary let me know that it is a little bit staticky sounding, and it might be louder than my voice, I'm not sure, so just brace yourself and hopefully it won't be too loud. So here we go. Could everyone hear that? Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, so the call of the southern leopard frog is kind of, it's very croaky. Some people compare it to almost like chuckling. And a lot of people compare it to the sound of like rubbing your finger over an inflated balloon. So I often do that with kids. I'll like bring an inflated balloon and get them to try to imitate the call of a southern leopard frog. All right, next up is the pickerel frog. So as you can see, they do look pretty similar to the southern leopard frog, but the main difference between the two is going to be the shape of the spots on their back. So with the pickerel frog, they're more square shaped, and they're also arranged in kind of two more distinct parallel rows. Sometimes those blotches will kind of merge together to form bars, but in general, they have the more square shape with the two parallel rows. They also lack the white spot in the center of their tympanum, like the southern leopard frog had. And in general, their snouts tend to be a little more like rounded, but that can be difficult to use when you're in the field. So I would just rely on the shape of the spots and the arrangement. This species produces skin secretions that are toxic to many predators, and actually many collectors have inadvertently killed other amphibians by putting them in the same container as a stressed out pickerel frog that's like releasing these toxins that can actually be really harmful to other amphibians and can actually be lethal to them. So yeah, just something to consider. And this species also may travel fairly far from the water, like more so than other frog species. You may see it a little more, a little farther from the water. So we'll listen to its call. So I mean, the only thing I can think to compare it to is like it says on there, is just kind of a snoring noise, right? It's a little more drawn out. It's low pitched. It's not super high like some other frog species, and it's just kind of that like that snoring sound that you don't want to hear other people doing in the middle of the night. So this is more of a direct comparison between a leopard frog and a pickerel frog. So you can see here the shape of the spots on the back are just different, and they're arranged a little bit differently. And that's how you can kind of make that distinction in the field. Next up, we have the American bullfrog. This is the largest bullfrog, or I'm sorry, the largest frog in North America, and it's the 7th largest frog in the world. So average adults can get up to around 5 inches, maybe bigger. So they're typically pretty plain green, but they will have, their face definitely tends to be green, but sometimes the back of their body can become more brown. It can be almost like a net-like pattern of green and brown. So it just kind of depends. It can be kind of variable, but they do tend to have that green colored face. And then the key thing when comparing it to the green frog, which we're going to talk about next, is that it has no dorsolateral ridges. So its back is just smooth. It doesn't have those raised skin lines of skin going down its back. This species, they are voracious predators. They will eat anything they can fit into their mouth. The tadpoles get very large, as you might be aware of. And they take 1 to 3 years to transform, and they are toxic or distasteful to fish. And because of this, sometimes bullfrogs will be more likely to lay eggs in areas where there are fish present, whereas other frog species will not do that to avoid fish predation. Dana, did you want to say something?
Yes, ma'am. Are they invasive? I heard that bullfrogs were invasive. I know they'll clean out a pond.
They're not invasive. They might almost act like an invasive species in some way, just because they do tend to be able to like take over certain environments, but they are native to the area.
They'll eat ducklings and mice and stuff.
Yeah, they will. Yeah, they will eat anything they can. Yeah, I'm not sure like if they're considered problematic. I'm not really sure. Maybe in certain habitats, depending on where you are, if they like really take over, but they are native to the area.
My dad took me out gigging, and it was to clean out the pond, but if they're not invasive, they need a place, you know. I didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're gonna listen to the call really quick. So the call is often compared to, people say it sounds like jug-o-rum, but I don't really use that to identify it, or like room. To me, it just sounds like I don't know why, but I always think of like laser beams coming out of a UFO or something. Like it sounds very like, I don't know, kind of like that to me. Like, anyway, you can just use whatever works for you to remember their calls. Okay, next up is the green frog. So, and just to, as a reminder, we are still in family Ranidae, so I'll let you know when we move to a different family. But this is the green frog. As you can see, they look pretty similar to bullfrogs. So they don't get quite as big, so that's one thing. And the other big way of distinguishing between the two is that green frogs have these really prominent dorsolateral ridges on each side of their body that you will notice if you see them out in the field. They are noticeable. And yeah, their coloration tends to be pretty dark green, sometimes more brownish, yellowish, just kind of depends. One interesting thing about this species is that studies have shown that some wild green frog populations will actually exhibit sex reversal. And this is something that has typically been associated with like heavily polluted urban and suburban ponds, because pollutants can cause frogs to like reverse sex as tadpoles. So basically their phenotypic sex does not match their genotypic sex. However, recent studies have actually shown it may actually be somewhat natural. Sex reversal may be somewhat natural in amphibians, and that it can actually occur in forested, unpolluted waterways as well. So I just was reading a paper on it, or kind of like the overall description of a paper on it, and there's definitely more things to investigate with regards to that, but just pretty interesting that they can do that. Okay, here's the green frog call. So I think a good description of that is that it can be kind of compared to the sound of plucking a loose banjo string. Just that kind of like doom, doom plucking noise. And then this is a more direct comparison of green frog and bullfrog. So you can see this is an example of a bullfrog that has kind of more of the brown spotty pattern on its back, but you can see that it still has the green face. And then, yeah, just noticing the dorsolateral ridges on the green frog when compared to no dorsolateral ridges on the bullfrog. All right, we're moving on to family Hylidae. So this is common. There's over 700 species in this family. It's commonly referred to as the tree frog family, but not all species of these are actually tree frogs. They're not all arboreal. So we'll mention like 2 tree frog species, and the other ones aren't technically tree frogs. So the first is the upland forest frog. So this is a small kind of brownish or grayish frog. It has a light line across its upper lip and then a dark line going through its eye. And they often have these 3 stripes down their back, but that's not, I mean, they can be pretty variable with that. But I think a good way to identify them is the stripe through their eye and the light color on their upper lip. And this species seems to be pretty adaptable to humans, so they'll often breed in roadside ditches and other human-associated habitats. And we'll listen to their call. It's one of my favorites. So it kind of is compared often to fingers running along the teeth of a comb, and it goes from, a lower pitch, it goes up and pitch, right? So it's like it kind of goes up. So that's something that you can use to identify their call. And they do breed a lot earlier than a lot of other species. So you see here that they start breeding February, March. So like I've already heard a ton of them around the Eno, and in other areas as well. All right, so this is the northern cricket frog. So we mentioned these earlier. These are some of my favorites, and I see them all the time. Like if I catch a frog, it's probably going to be a cricket frog out on the Eno. but these are small warty frogs. So they do have kind of like warty looking skin. They are variable shades of gray, brown, or green. Many have a stripe down the center of their back and a triangular mark on the kind of the top of their head that you can use to distinguish them. But and there are also southern cricket frogs that live in North Carolina, but you can distinguish them by their range and their call because they look very similar. But in our area, we have the northern cricket frog. This is actually a picture of one that I found at one of our events recently. And you can just tell that it's a cricket frog. You can't really see well in this photo, but it does have the really warty skin, you know, and then it does have some green like mottling on its back. So it's kind of gray and then has some green spots that can kind of tell you that it's a cricket frog. And they're active day and night. And like I said, often found along the banks of the Eno. So here's their call. So I think the best way to you know, to describe that is that they have, it kind of sounds like marbles or pebbles clicking together. So this is another one that we will like have kids try to imitate by clicking marbles together in their hand. And we'll start to hear those like pretty soon, if not already. Okay, spring peeper, a lot of people are probably pretty familiar with this species. They're small and then they have this X-shaped mark on their back. So that can really, they can be variable in coloration, but that X shape on their back is really a way to identify them. Unlike many other frog species, spring peepers lay their eggs singly rather than in a mass. They lay them near vegetation at the bottom of water. And we'll go ahead and listen to so very high-pitched peeping noise, right? And it can be heard from over a mile away. So I actually was driving on my street the other night and just heard them like they were going crazy in some of the wet areas around the road. It was really cool. I stopped and listened for a while. So they're very loud. They're tiny, but they're loud. All right, so the green tree frog is up next. This species is usually pretty bright green. It tends to have these whitish or yellowish stripes down each side of their bodies. And then they have those really long limbs and digits with the sticky toe pads that are indicative of a tree frog. They are nocturnal. They forage for insects at night and then rest in like moist, shady areas during the day. And they're generally arboreal, so they spend a lot of time in trees, but they're also often found near porch and patio lights, especially during like warm, wet weather, because the lights attract insects, and that's a really easy meal for these tree frogs. They will also occupy plastic PVC pipes, which are now used to help monitor their populations. So they'll get down inside these little PVC pipes that if you're trying to track their populations, you can like go and check them, you know, you attach them to a tree or whatever, and then you can check them and try to monitor their populations. And Dave Cook, who was the superintendent of Eno River State Park for many years and then worked at Eno River Association for a while as well, noted that at least in his experience, he didn't notice this species a whole lot until the past 10 years in the area. So I don't know if that's everyone's experience, but he thinks that climate change may be having an impact on the way that this species on its range. And here's the call. It's very nasally, it's loud, it's kind of like quack, quack, quack. So I just think of it as like a very nasal kind of alarm noise. So the Cope's gray tree frog, we're still in family Hylidae, another tree frog species. They're a fairly large tree frog species with large toe pads, and they have really granular looking skin as well. They can really vary in color from like a mottled gray color, different shades of gray, to like a light green color. And that color can really change depending on the environment and activity. Usually they have a light spot beneath their eye that you can use to identify them. And they also have bright colored like inner thighs. That's thought to startle or confuse potential predators as they try to get away, is that bright coloration. They spend much of their life high in trees and are most often encountered during breeding season, which lasts from March to August in general. But calling is most intense during the early summer, and their call sounds like this. So kind of a musical, kind of a harsh like trill that this species produces. Okay, so I want to talk about toads for just a minute. So the distinction between frogs and toads is really more informal. It's not really based on, you know, taxonomic or evolutionary history as much. So technically speaking, toads are simply a subclassification of frogs. So Bufonidae is the true toad family that contains the animals that we think of when we hear the word toad. So they tend to have these characteristics that you see in the right-hand column. They have like wartier, drier skin, you know, short legs. They're kind of squat. They're in drier areas. But this is not true of all toads. So for example, eastern narrowmouth toads or eastern spadefoot toads are the families Microhylidae and Scaphiopotidae, respectively. So the term toad has just kind of become an informal way of classifying certain types of frogs, but toads are frogs. So not all frogs are toads, but all toads are frogs. They're kind of a subclassification. So the first toad we're going to talk about, so we're in family Bufonidae. This is the true toads, like I mentioned, over 350 species, and it's the only family in which all members are known as toads. So the American toad is North Carolina's largest toad species. It's really variable in its coloration and its patterning, but it does tend to have that dry, warty skin. And then the way to distinguish it from a Fowler's toad, the very similar Fowler's toad, is by counting the number of warts in each of the dark spots on their back. So American toads have 1 to 2 warts per dark spot, whereas Fowler's toads, which we'll talk about next, have 3 or more warts per dark spot on their back. So that is always the way that I've identified them. I will mention another way in a moment, but that's just always the way that I've used. This species is considered economically important due to the large quantities of insects they consume, which can be good for agriculture and human health and all of that. The tadpoles of this species have many ways to reduce predation, such as swimming in schools during the day, like fish. They also produce a toxic chemical in their skin, and fish have been actually known to die after eating an American toad tadpole. And here's their call. Really pretty. It's very long. It's a lot longer than any of the other species. It can last up to 30 seconds, and it's really a high-pitched, long trill. Okay, and then last frog species is the Fowler's toad. So like I mentioned, they can be sometimes difficult to distinguish from American toads, but really counting, you can see in this photo, they have 3 or more spots or warts in each dark spot on their back. But they also have that dry, warty skin and a similar body shape to American toads. One thing to note about their reproduction is that Fowler's toads breed repeatedly throughout the spring. So as many as 10 different age classes separated by several days have been observed over the course of a breeding season in a specific pond. So that's kind of interesting. And then they secrete toxic compounds from the warts on their back, which is distasteful to predators and can be lethal to small mammals. And this species is also known to play dead. Like they'll kind of just lay on their back sometimes. Like people have witnessed them laying on their back in their hand or something to play dead. Okay, here's their call. It's very nasally. It's kind of like whiny. It's just like, wah. It kind of reminds me of a narrowmouth toad call, but yeah, very nasally and whiny. This is this kind of has another way to distinguish the American and Fowler's toad. I'm not going to really go into that simply because of time, because I need to keep going. But parotoid, the proximity of postorbital ridges here and parotoid glands can be another way to tell apart Fowler's and American toads. And then this is a table that I quickly created that shows the general, the general months that these species will be breeding and therefore potentially calling. As you can see, April is a really, really busy month for frogs. So this time of year, you will can potentially hear lots of different calls. And it can be fun to, test yourself and try and see if you can pick out which species you're hearing. Some species, are more likely to breed in the winter and some in the spring and summer. So it just kind of depends. All right, we're going to jump into salamanders. I love talking about salamanders, so let's get into it. And then I'll just, ask for questions at the end if that's okay with everybody, unless there's like a really pressing question. Okay, salamanders. So salamanders are in the order Urodela. You might also hear the term caudata, which is kind of like the clade or the group that Urodela is under. So basically, caudata and Urodela can be used kind of interchangeably by some, but some scientists have suggested using Urodela to describe just like the extant, the currently living species, while caudata is more inclusive of like fossil and extant species. So that's why I'm using Urodela if you're, if you've usually used caudata. Salamanders are characterized by a lizard-like appearance. I can't tell you how many times I've had people think that a salamander is a lizard. It's so funny because obviously I've always studied wildlife, but they just seem very different to me, but they do look like pretty lizardy. They tend to have slender bodies, although some of them can be kind of chunky. They have blunt snouts. They have short limbs that project at right angles to their body. And then they have tails in both the larvae and adults. So with frogs, they lose their tails as adults, but that's not the case with salamanders. And something that's really cool is that salamander diversity is highest in Eastern North America, especially in the Appalachian Mountains. So we are really in an area where there are a lot of different salamander species. And if you look online at the salamander species out like west, there are just so many in Western North Carolina, and they all look very similar. I don't know if I'd be very good at telling them apart. So one cool thing is that this group of amphibians is capable of regenerating lost limbs as well as other damaged body parts. And some also use tail autotomy, which is what you see in like skink species when they lose their tail if they're being threatened by a predator. So some salamanders will do that as well. In terms of some basic anatomy, just some things I'm going to mention. First up is the vent. I'll mention the vent in just a moment. And that is just the outer opening of the cloaca. So I'm sure that some of you are familiar with the cloaca. It's just a common chamber and outlet into which the intestinal, urinary, and genital tracts open. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for all the salamanders' needs. Amphibians, reptiles, birds, and actually monotremes have these. Monotremes are like echidnas and platypus. So mammal species. There are two mammal species that have cloacas, which is interesting. And then also, so the vent is just the outer opening of that cloaca. Costal grooves are these grooves that they have between their ribs, that have like nerves and blood vessels. And all but the newt family have these. Salamandridae have costal grooves, and they are thought to help them stay moist by creating channels for water to move over the body. Then there are nasolabial grooves. So these are vertical slits between the nostril and upper lip, which is lined with glands and enhances chemoreception. These are really prominent in lungless salamanders, which is the Plethodonidae family. And it's thought to have to do with the fact that they don't have lungs. So because they don't have lungs to like expel debris and build up in their nostrils, they have these these grooves that are structured in a way that maximizes drainage from the nose. So that's kind of part of what's thought to be the reason that more lungless salamanders have these prominent nasolabial grooves. And then some salamanders also have parotoid glands as well, like we mentioned with the frogs. This is just fascinating to me. So life cycle and reproduction. So first of all, many salamanders do not use vocalization. So we will not be hearing salamander calls because they don't really do them. And in most species, the sexes look alike. So they really rely on olfactory and tactile cues to identify potential mates. The majority, as in about 90% of salamanders, practice internal fertilization. So that's the opposite of frogs, right? Which did mostly external fertilization. So and then they have indirect sperm transfer. So basically the male deposits a spermatophore, which is like a little packet of sperm on the ground or in the water, depending on the species. And the female picks it up with her vent, which is what I mentioned before, is the outer opening of the cloaca. In most cases, a larval stage follows the egg stage where the larvae is fully aquatic, but there are a few different options for life cycles in salamanders. So there are the direct developers. So in this case, there's no aquatic larval stage. The courtship, the mating, and the egg laying all occur on land, and the terrestrial egg hatches as a fully formed miniature adult. Viviparous species, there's also no aquatic larval stage, but in this case, the embryo develops inside the body of the mother, who then gives birth to live young. The only species, or not the only species, but if you've ever heard of a fire salamander in Europe, they're European, I think they're on an episode of like Wild Kratts, so a lot of people have heard of fire salamanders. They are viviparous, but we won't, it's very rare in salamanders, and we won't have an example today of that. Then there's paedomorphic salamanders. So there is an aquatic larval stage, but the salamander never outgrows its juvenile characteristics. Instead, it just grows larger and becomes sexually mature, but it stays completely aquatic and retains its gills, its flattened tail, all of those features of the aquatic larvae. And then finally, the biphasic life cycle. This is the most common life cycle, which involves two life stages: an aquatic larval stage and a terrestrial adult stage. So we will see examples of all of these except for viviparous, and we'll actually also see an example of a species with 3 life stages, if you're familiar with the newt, which is fascinating. All right, so really quick, all of the salamander species I'm going to discuss have been encountered along the Eno, some in more specific spots, and some kind of more just throughout the area. Often adult salamanders can be found under logs, in leaf litter, kind of trying to stay moist. And then of course, larvae can be found in the water. They're most likely to be seen during breeding season or on warm, rainy nights. And once again, a lot of these species rely on those ephemeral, temporary pools of water that fill up during rainy season. So they might be associated with kind of those areas located around the river. And there may be some species that I don't mention that are in fact around the Eno. This is just based on mine and a few others' experiences of the common species. So if you've seen other species along the Eno, please let me know. I would be happy to add them to my list. All right, we are starting with family Ambystomatidae. So this is the mole salamanders. There are about 30 species in this family. It is a group of advanced salamanders that are endemic to or only found in North America. They're known for having wide protruding eyes, prominent costal grooves, and thick arms, and most also have vivid patterning on like a dark background. So the marbled salamander is just super cute. They're very stout bodied, kind of like chunky in appearance. They have a black or dark brown body with these light white silvery crossbands down their back. They breed in the fall, which is unlike most other mole salamanders that breed in the winter. The courtship occurs on land. Males will compete by butting heads and blocking another male's movements with its tail. Once again, unlike most other mole salamanders, marbled salamanders do not lay their eggs in the water. Instead, they lay up to 200 eggs in dried up pools and ponds, and then those eggs hatch after the ponds refill. And a fairly unique parental care behavior is that the females will stay with the eggs and wrap her body around them to form kind of a bowl shape to collect rainwater over the eggs, to make them more moist and ready to develop. They are actually also known to abandon their nests like somewhat readily after any sort of disturbance. Even though they're really good with parental care, they'll also kind of, if there's a big disturbance, they'll be like, peace out. So they do have that biphasic life cycle that I said is the most common. The eggs hatch into aquatic larvae, which takes about 2 to 9 months to metamorphose into terrestrial juveniles. And then they can actually live for like 8 to 10 years. So a common theme with salamanders is that they're relatively long-lived, like more long-lived than I think most people would assume. So next is the spotted salamander, also in family Abystomatidae. This species is large with black, gray, brown background color and 2 rows of orangey, yellowy colored spots, so they're pretty hard to misidentify because they're pretty unique in how they look. They have a similar life cycle to marbled salamanders, a biphasic life cycle. The female lays large clumps of up to 200 eggs in shallow pools, and the eggs are often associated with algae. So I find this pretty fascinating. There's believed to be a symbiotic relationship between algae and spotted salamander eggs, where the algae are provided with a safe place to live and grow, and in turn they produce oxygen, which is needed for embryonic development. So I was like looking at pictures online, and it's just really cool. They'll have like, these clumps of just eggs covered in algae, and that's actually, you might see that and be like, oh, that doesn't look good, but it's actually thought to be a symbiotic relationship. And this species can live for up to 20 years. So now we're moving to family Plethodonidae. So these are the lungless salamanders that I mentioned before. There are about over 250 species in this family. It's by far the largest group of salamanders. All plethodonids breathe through their skin and the mucous membranes in their mouth and throat. So they don't have lungs. It's really important that they stay moist, because that's how they breathe. So the northern dusky salamander, this species body, the upper body varies from kind of a reddish brown to a gray or olive color. They tend to be kind of sparsely covered with dark spots and mottling that's concentrated on the sides. And then there's a light line that runs kind of diagonally from the eye to the jaw, which is a good way to identify them. They're abundant in and near cool streams and small rivers, and they also have that biphasic life cycle. And the males, this isn't actually a picture. I couldn't find a picture of a northern dusky with a mental gland, but this is a different species, but they have these mental glands. The males have these mental glands on their chin, which is a glandular tissue under the chin that becomes enlarged when they're sexually active, and it's used in courtship. So they'll like tap their mental gland to the females, and I don't know what all happens, but it's used in that process. Okay. Southern two-lined, I love this species. When we were looking for macroinvertebrates recently in the river, we found quite a few southern two-lined larvae, which was cool. And this species is fairly small and slender. It is tan to light yellow, and then it has 2 black longitudinal stripes going down their backs from their eyes kind of down to their tail. And they also have the biphasic life cycle. Oh, and I was just going to mention, there is another species that looks like extremely similar to this species that's only found, I think, in Western North Carolina. So this is the only species that you'll find here that looks like this. The males have cirri, which are these small downward projections from the nostril that are thought to play a role in chemoreception. So you can see these little projections. And then this is a redback salamander. So this species actually exhibits polymorphism. So that is the occurrence of 2 or more different phenotypes in an interbreeding population. Polymorphic traits are sustained in a population because they are favorable in evolution for adaptive evolution and allows the genes to be passed on in different environmental conditions. So the two main color morphs for the redback salamander are the red-backed morph, which has that red dorsal stripe down the back, and then also the lead-backed morph. Sometimes they're referred to as striped and unstriped. I've always heard red-backed and lead-backed. So the lead-backed morph lacks most or all of the red pigmentation, but both have extensive black and white speckling on the belly that gives kind of like a salt and pepper effect that you can use to identify them. And there's actually a yellow-backed morph as well that is extremely rare. And then the two different morphs actually differ in their escape behaviors when exposed to predators and also in their rate of tail autotomization, which is a really fun word to say, autotomization. So the red stripe morph prefers to stay still and hold its ground and hope it's not seen when encountered by a potential predator, while a lead-phased morph is more likely to be more mobile when threatened. And then also lead-backed morphs apparently have the ability to lose their tail more readily. So polymorphism in this species seems to be guided by some like environmental climate variables like temperature and also by differential predation in certain areas. So I started to like get into reading that and I was like, okay, I can't spend forever reading about this, but it's a pretty interesting, if you're interested in looking further into that, I think there's a paper on it online. And this is the first species that we'll see that is a direct developer. So they do not have a biphasic life cycle. They do not go through an aquatic larval stage. Instead, their eggs are laid on land and they hatch as little miniature adults. So you're not going to find redback salamander larvae in the river. Okay. This is the white spotted. Oh, I'm running low on time. I just have a couple more, 3 more species. So the white spotted slimy salamander is a shiny black salamander with scattered whitish cream spots or flecks. It was previously considered a single species, but has since been divided into a complex of closely related species, 6 of which are found in North Carolina. So the dark gray area is where this species is located on this map here, the white spotted slimy. And they are also direct developers, similar to the the redback salamander. And the reason they're called slimy salamanders is because they have glands in their skin that secrete a really sticky slime that sticks to your hand like glue, and that's to deter predators. Okay, eastern red-spotted newt. If you have to head out, that's totally fine. It's being recorded. I'll just be about 5 more minutes So family Salamandridae. These are the true salamanders and newts. They're about 55 species. They are distinguished from other salamanders by their lack of costal grooves and their rough skin. And that's because they have poison glands that produce tetrodotoxins. And they also lack nasolabial grooves. So eastern red-spotted newt, one of my favorites. It has 3 life stages, so it's very unique in its life cycle. The males and females have an elaborate courtship ritual, which involves the males wafting pheromones toward the female with their tails. After the eggs are fertilized, the female will individually lay 50 to 300 eggs on submerged vegetation. Once they hatch, the aquatic larvae will stay in the water for about 2 to 5 months, and the larvae are this picture up here. So they're sort of greenish with a dark stripe running through their eye, and that's important because that will be the case for the adults as well. So this dark stripe that runs through their eye. So they then lose their gills, they grow lungs, and they become terrestrial Fs. So this is the middle stage, the juvenile stage. They come on land. The Fs are bright orange with rows of black bordered red spots on either side of their body. And the bright coloration is what's called aposematic coloration or warning coloration. And it's used to deter predators because, like I said before, they produce these tetrodotoxins out of their skin that make them distasteful to predatory animals. And they can spend up to about 7 years on land before they turn into breeding adults. And during this time, the eft may travel pretty far. So this serves as a really important dispersal strategy for this species, where they'll go to different ponds and other areas. Eventually, they become aquatic again as adults who are ready to mate and reproduce. So you can see this picture down here Adults have, they still have those kind of spots, the black bordered spots. But they have more brown green skin and but they have that dark stripe again that the larvae had that runs through their eye. And they breathe through their skin when they're in the water, but they can only stay underwater for a limited amount of time before they have to come up for air with their lungs. And they have a total lifespan of about 12 to 15 years in the wild. And then lastly, we have the Neuse River water dog, which is one of my favorites. You can see a picture down here of me holding one. This was actually by the Little River. I was with NC State technicians who were working on a Neuse River water dog project. So they are in family Proteidae. This is the water dogs and mud puppies and olms, and there's only 6 living species in this family. So these are aquatic salamanders that are only found in the Balkans, so like southeastern Europe and in North America. The Neuse River water dog is fairly large with a reddish brown body and sort of irregular pattern of bluish black spots. They are the only paedomorphic species that we will discuss. So they never become terrestrial. They remain aquatic and they keep their juvenile characteristics. They can get up to about 1 foot long as adults. And they are endemic to or only found in the Neuse and Tarr-Pamlico river basins. There have been a handful found in the Eno in recent years, but their populations are really declining. They were recently listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's thought to be as a result of increased development and impervious surfaces that produce runoff into our local waterways that have pollution and can, really affect, especially like these aquatic salamanders that spend their whole life in the water and are taking those toxins in through their skin. But this species is also cold adapted. So that's another consideration, is that they could be sensitive to climate change. They're only really active at temperatures below like 50, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So they mate in the late fall and winter. And that's really like the time of year that they are very active. So you definitely don't encounter them in general unless you're really looking for them, I would say. But definitely less likely to encounter them when it's hot out because they are cold adapted. All right, so last but not least, we have a slide on why amphibians are important. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but I just want to mention that, we've talked about some really cool species that are found along the Eno. Not everybody may find them so interesting or cool, but they are really important for all of us. They are critical for insect and pest control, so there are benefits to agriculture and human health. They also serve as bioindicators, so their permeable skin, like I said, makes them really vulnerable to drought and to toxins, and they can tell us a lot about the health of our ecosystems. And then they also play a key role in food web dynamics, serving as important food for a wide range of species, birds, mammals, reptiles, etc. And they support ecosystem services as well. So they can have positive impacts on decomposition and nutrient cycling. And they also just really help to maintain those balanced ecosystems that provide us with important ecosystem services and clean air and clean water and all of that good stuff that we very much need. And that is it. If there are any questions, I'm happy to stay on. And I also just want to say, if you have any notable amphibian experiences along the Eno, please feel free to email me. You don't need to email me every time you see a frog, because that would be a lot. But if you have any species that I didn't mention that you see, or just any cool experience, feel free to email me. I would love to hear about it. Yeah, and that's about it. So, any questions?